we all have a picture of what a brain looks like, and it'll be pretty similar. But there's parts of the brains that we can't see that are different, and those are called neurons, and that's how they connect to different places in your brain and in your body. And I say it's kind of like wires, and they connect. And there's different ways and patterns that our brain connects to different parts of our brain and body that make us different. So it makes us be able to learn our favorite song, or it makes some of us good at chess, and it makes some of us good at tag, and all of these things that make us different. And the differences between us is really what's called neurodiversity.
Not only the neurodiverse child, but the neurotypical child who wants to be friends with that neurodiverse child, but just doesn't know, maybe, how can I approach this moment with this neurotypical child or neuroatypical child? And how can I bridge this sort of difference? As we would do with skin color, as we would do with anything else, like the differences is what makes us more powerful. And thank you for this book for that.
I think that this book helps give neurotypical kids more of a mindset shift about behaviors that they might have seen from their classmates or siblings or cousins when their cousin had a meltdown at the family barbecue over not wanting breadcrumbs on the mac and cheese and thinking like, oh, well, my parents would make me eat that. They're a crybaby.
Welcome back to the Peds Doc Talk podcast. Thank you for being here. We continue to be a top 50 parenting podcast in the United States, thanks to you and also my amazing guests, because let's be honest, they make the show what it is. And I cannot wait to have this guest on today to chat about something so important to me. We're going to be talking about this today, okay? This is a new book that I think every parent should have to read to their children, with their child, and also for their own knowledge. And I am chatting with Laura Petix. She is a pediatric occupational therapist, neurodivergent parent to a neurodivergent child, and founder of OT Butterfly, a platform to educate and empower parents about how sensory processing shapes behavior, and author of a book called A Kid's Book About Neurodiversity, which has been a book that I think the world has needed for so long. Thank you so much for joining me today, Laura. Can I just hold the book near my face the entire time?
Oh my gosh, it makes me so happy to see that. It makes me so happy to see, I started getting pictures yesterday of the little hands holding the book, and that just gives me chills. It's such an honor to be able to put this book out there. So thank you for letting me share this with your audience today.
Well, I do have to put the book down so I can speak to you. Otherwise it's going to hit the mic or hit the camera. But
exactly.
This is something that I wanted to move up in terms of recording. I record in batches. My listeners know that, but I heard you were coming out with this book. You obviously contacted, and I'm like, this is what the world needs. And for anyone who's not familiar with this series, so A Kid's Book About is a series of various books on very important topics. So, about various things in diversity. So racism, or, a kid's book about different holidays. And I just love it. And we have not seen one about neurodiversity. And so it's geared towards families, children ages 5 and up can read it. I have not yet read it with my son because we just got it, but he is 5 and he is excited. And I'm so excited too. And before we get into it, I just want to read one page, and then I'm going to ask you a question because I just want to tell you how powerful this is. So I'm reading a page from the book. So for anyone who's not watching, I'm opening a book right now and they're listening. Okay. So I'm just going to read a little part. For example, imagine eating with your family. Your grown-ups usually make the same meal, but this time they add something different to it. You might not like the new version of the meal as much, but you still eat it. But for someone with a neurodivergent brain, this unexpected change might feel really big or scary, and their body responds to that. And this can look like crying, screaming, or moving their body in big ways. Okay, the reason why I chose to read that is you take situations that are so typical to all families, right? Everyone has had dinner at a dining table with a kid who may be refusing, and you brought to light how this can be different in a family who has a neurodiverse child, how a change can be so much harder for that child. And what does this book mean to you? Why do you think it's so important that you wrote it? And what do you hope that the listeners today get if they read the book, or especially even just after our conversation?
I'm so glad that you read that passage because it's not one that's often talked about, but it is a really great way to illustrate how behaviors that we see that can be labeled different ways, like bad child or a kid that's acting spoiled or bratty or wanting attention, how it really can be stemming from a neurological difference in the way that their brain is wired and how their brain responds to things in the environment. And so my daughter is my inspiration for everything that I do behind the OT butterfly. For everyone listening, my daughter is neurodivergent. And like many parents, I would say all parents, we are always learning from our kids. So she is a mirror, a reflection into all the strengths that I have and all of the things that I can probably aim to be better at or look at the world differently. And so she's a big inspiration for this book. And what surprises a lot of people to hear about this book is while it's definitely helpful for neurodivergent kids to feel represented and to have this book to feel like it can be a part of their story and help them feel seen, I really, really wrote it imagining reading it to neurotypical kids, reading
Yes.
it to the peers of my daughter, the classmates in her class. And that's because I think that there's so much burden put on neurodivergent families to constantly uh, talk about and explain behaviors and challenges and things that might feel different to others. And it's always the responsibility of the neurodivergent child and family to conform to the environment and to adapt themselves to make others more comfortable. And I think it's so important that neurotypical kids understand that it's a collective responsibility of all of us to make each environment as inclusive as possible for everybody. And so I think that this book helps give neurotypical kids more of a mindset shift about behaviors that they might have seen from their classmates or siblings or cousins when their cousin had a meltdown at the family barbecue over not wanting breadcrumbs on the mac and
Yeah.
cheese and thinking like, oh, well, my parents would make me eat that. They're a crybaby. And so helping make those shifts for kids is really helpful. And what I've found out is that as parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles read these books with their kids, it's starting to seep in for them as well. And that's just the best of both worlds for me.
I love it. I told you I loved it already, but one of the biggest things that I appreciate so much is we talk about diversity a lot, right? We talk about diversity, and people tend to think diversity is always visible, meaning that it's skin color or that it's maybe someone who has like able-bodied or in a wheelchair, things like that. But neurodiversity is a form of diversity that I think is often overlooked or not talked about. And the fact that you're gearing this towards neurotypical families is so useful. And I know kids notice differences long before we think they do, right? Even
Mhm.
if it's something like neurodiversity, right? So, and if we don't give them the language to understand neurodiversity, they may fill the gaps with assumptions, like you mentioned, a crybaby, or why are they
Mhm.
being a brat? When sometimes these are negative things. And with a little more compassion, with a little more empathy, and most importantly for me, with a little more inclusion, this can make
Yes.
everyone have better relationships, right? Not only the neurodiverse child, but the neurotypical child who wants to be friends with that neurodiverse child, but just doesn't
Yes.
know maybe how can I approach this moment with this neurotypical child or neuroatypical child, and how can I bridge this sort of difference? As we would do with skin color, as we would do with anything else, like the differences is what makes us more powerful. And thank you for this book for that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that this is really our chance to take control of the narrative. So that I like that these books are geared towards 5 and up, and I hear from families all the time, is my child too young to talk about
Yeah.
this? And if anyone who's listening, I recommend you find the TED Talk of the founder of A Kids Co. His name is Jelani Memory,
Yeah.
and he did a TED Talk called Kids Are Ready. And that's the entire spirit of these books, is that kids are ready to have these conversations. This book is not your typical bedtime story with like a mouse or a dinosaur going through the story. Those are great, fun, engaging books. These books, this series, and mine as well, have embellishments and designs to make some words stand out, but there's not a lot of illustration. The message is really, really meant to stand out and shine. And it helps us take control of the narrative and help our kids take control of the narrative early on so that it doesn't those gaps don't get filled, like you said, with misconceptions, mislabels, and misunderstandings of how their peers are behaving around them.
And I would love to segue into that exact comment, the misconceptions. What would you say are some of the most common misconceptions about neurodivergent kids that you wish more parents or more neurotypical children would understand?
You sort of touched on it earlier, but I would say one of the top ones I think about is that there's a specific look to being neurodivergent. And I am guilty of that too. I came into this before I had my daughter and learned more about neurodiversity. I also had a very particular picture of what I thought it meant to look autistic
Yeah.
or neurodivergent. And a lot of that came from the narrow scope that we had growing up. We now know that the diagnostic criteria and the way that we evaluate autism and other neurodivergent neurotypes looks different. It's a broader net that casts that catches more. So it looks different now because we know more about it. And I also didn't understand the concept or the actual ability of masking. I also thought if you can mask it, if you can fake it, then you must not be neurodivergent, which is
Mhm.
a lot of the misconception I see around there with parents and teachers, and then just really mislabeling kids as a quote just a behavior or a behavioral child. So that's one of the top misconception. And then the second one that kind of leans on that is that just because the world is built with a society that's more conducive to neurotypical standards and neurotypical norms, it doesn't mean that that's the one and only and the right way, and that
Yeah.
everyone who deviates from that needs to get back to that to be on track, to be right. Like that does not mean it. It does mean that it makes it harder for certain neurotypes and brain patterns to feel comfortable in every environment, but it doesn't mean that they need to change that about them in order to be accepted or function in society. There are ways to adapt the environment around that.
And one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is that I hope parents would read this book with their children because the book obviously has language for a child to understand. But I also wanted you to come on so that we could talk to parents about
Yes.
neurodiversity because sometimes, as we know, if you are more familiar with the neurotypical world, you're not going to understand. And you just mentioned like a world built for neurotypical brains. In what ways do you think neurodivergent children are excluded due to a lack of understanding about neurodiversity or because of the way the world is? Like, why do you think, that neurodivergent children might have an exclusion in this way?
I think a lot of it happens socially because,
Yeah.
again, it starts with kids. Kids are not taught how different play and different communication might look like. They might misinterpret behavior as rude or that kid doesn't want to play with you because they ignored you. There's some behavior like sensory seeking or stimming behaviors that might not be talked about. And their parents say, don't stare, don't look at them. But it also doesn't mean to make that person invisible.
Yeah.
Maybe understand why they do that or be curious about why that happens. But I think it's really this misunderstanding that it's that there's a deficit or an impairment with, and that it's not worth your time to try to play with them or communicate with them because they're different. So I think the whole word different and differences needs to be rebranded
Mhm.
with this particular context. And that I hope that this book and the way we talk about neurodiversity, at least one, neutralizes the term being different. We don't have to say it's a positive thing always, but
Yeah.
it's not a negative thing to say I'm different. So we want to neutralize the word and the feeling around difference. And then we also want to normalize that there are differences among everybody around between neurotypical people and neurodivergent people and autistic and all different kinds of neurotype. Just normalize that they exist everywhere, and ignoring them or expecting them to change is not a way that the world is going to move forward with inclusion.
And I so appreciate you mentioning earlier in this conversation already that you also held some of those judgments, or misconceptions before you went through your own experience. And I as well, a lot of what I knew about neurodiversity was, like you had mentioned, from movies that were not always depictive of what it should be. I'm going to use the signature movie from the olden days, which is Rain Man. I think people
Uh-huh.
know Rain Man. When you start to show that and that alone is what people see, they think it has to be that.
Yep.
That's autism, that's neurodiverse, that's one. But obviously, we know neurodiversity is not only autism. And even within autism, there's a spectrum of autism, and it's not
Exactly.
always going to be what you see. And even now, how it's changed my life as a pediatrician, understanding neurodiversity more is before I understood this level I mean, I could learn even more. And I love being in contact with people like you and people who teach me about neurodiversity even more. Is before this, it was very much like, sometimes when a child would come in and they were more difficult or having more meltdowns, the office would be like, okay, more tough love. And now when I hear a child like screaming when they're taking vitals, I'm like, that seems a little unusual because they're older. Because typically our older children do get more comfortable with the doctor, but they're like a 4 or 5 year old. And then I look at the chart and it says some sort of, maybe it's autism, maybe it's something else. And I'm like, hey, can we take a step back here and maybe approach this in a different way? And so
Yeah.
it's important for us to know this because it's not a difficult child, like you mentioned. It's not a lack of parental boundary. It's not that. And sometimes we judge so much. And I've been there too on that side of the judgment of like, oh, well, why are they doing that? And even with things like screen time, I make my own screen time rules and I very much understand. And when I try to educate, I try to add the nuance, which is always hard sometimes. But this is what I do. But I know that some children who are neurodiverse really benefit from having screens as a coping skill when they're overwhelmed, or having that security, having that with them. And it's so important that we listen to these conversations and learn from our neurodiverse families and children, just like we would. And I go back to things that are more visible, like skin color, right?
Yeah.
It is differences. We can say that I am Indian and you
Yep.
are
Filipino.
Filipino. We are
Mhm.
different. And
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say we're the same. We are different. I'm Indian, you're Filipino. We both have amazing food and we can connect over
Yeah.
that. Just like a
Yes.
neurotypical child and a neuroatypical child can relate to the fact that they both love playing with dinosaurs. Like, using that as an example, like, we are different, but we can connect over joint interests and be kind if we don't. Right. And
Yes.
that's, to me, what I think is always lacking. And that when you have judgment in the driver's seat, like, oh God, like that difficult kid, why is he grabbing the cupcake? Like, why is he
Yeah.
not waiting for the birthday song to be done? Like, when we understand that, you know what? Let's give the parents a little benefit of the doubt and let's give the child a little benefit of the doubt. And I try to teach adults in my life this too. When they judge children, like, oh, I'm like, we don't know that child. Like, we don't know. We can't make an assumption. We can't say it's bad parenting because people think it's bad parenting. And I've learned that it's not. Ooh, my voice just cracked. I wasn't crying. But I've learned that it's not. Like, it's we got to understand a whole situation. And nobody knows that except that family. Like, and
Yep.
maybe the pediatrician who has a really close relationship on things that they're struggling with. But I know better now of like, is this a lack of boundaries or is this a child who needs to learn the world in a different way, like a neurodiverse child? And I think it's so important that we
Exactly.
just, as a human in society, that we give people the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what? Let them figure it out. Let's hold compassion, because if we were in those shoes in any other situation, I would hope that we would want the same in return.
I couldn't have said it better. I'm so glad that you are it's so good to have medical professionals understand and take an interest in understanding neurodiversity from this perspective, because as you said, that it's so quick to try to adjust or try to change behaviors for the convenience of a medical visit to go
Yeah.
faster, or lots of things that I get, but it's just really trying to see it from a different perspective and understanding that these behaviors are stemming from a nervous system response. Like, there's really, how can we fault a child for feeling unsafe in their nervous system and then reacting in that way?
You're, like, really good at segues, because I was literally gonna ask something around that. Like, you don't even know, but, like, I was, like, feeling unsafe, right? So my next question was really, like, how does all of this, right, not talking about neurodiversity from early age, how does it impact that neurodivergent child's brain, self-esteem, and the way their peers interact with them if we're not having these conversations?
Oh, I have been doing a lot of research, both, informal, just talking to autistic adults and late identified adults, and also reading some research on it. And the resounding uh, narrative or thoughts and opinions that I'm hearing is that knowing that this is part of your identity, that your brain is wired
Mhm.
differently, as opposed to thinking that there's something wrong with you, and accepting the mislabels of being lazy, being bad, being stubborn, being all of these things, it can really take a toll on your mental health
Yeah.
and lead to burnout, because when you don't know that this is the way that you're hardwired to function in the world and you're working against the grain for up until your 30s and 40s, when some people are still now just
Yeah.
identifying or getting diagnosed as neurodivergent, it takes a toll on your nervous system and the way you function. And then it's so hard to unlearn that. It's
Yeah.
so hard. And so not only is it self-esteem, but truly just functional burnout in day-to-day life. And you can imagine how that translates to parenting and being in a marriage or a partnership and your friendships and all of that. And as even someone in the field who now I myself just identified that I have ADHD and I'm neurodivergent, unlearning the habits that I have formed in order to keep up with what I thought was expected of me, because if I wasn't, then there was something wrong. That is so hard. That is
Yeah.
very, very hard to undo. And I could see how it had an effect on my mental health. And I didn't even have really significant needs growing up as so many others. And so I've heard from others who were bullied and they just have gone their whole life believing those things that were said about them and having this sense of relief now, understanding that there's been nothing wrong with them this entire time. They just were forcing themselves to function on a different operating system that wasn't compatible with the way that their brain worked.
It's so freeing, and I love that you brought up the example of so many adults who got diagnoses later in life, that they
Yeah.
finally got that ADHD or neurodivergent diagnoses, and how freeing that can be because now you understand your mind more and understand your body more. It's just like how we would want a diagnosis for like something else, right? Like just say you are like, you're dealing with something and people see you finally. They're like, "Yeah, you
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
this person." And I love that. And that is awesome that you think about that. And for me, as a mother and then also pediatrician and also just going through my own childhood, I think about my peers growing up who probably could have had this sort of neurodiversity label, if we want to say that, and never got it. And they probably went through their entire life. And hopefully, as an adult, they now feel seen, and how hard that was in a school system, right? With peers, with teachers who didn't know as much as we know now in the 90s and 80s,
Yeah.
the class clown, like the troublemaker,
Yes.
like you said,
Yeah,
the labels that we put that aren't as positive as neurodivergent. Like this child
exactly.
can't sit down because this child is not able to sit down for 7 hours in a day because
Mhm.
most children can't. And then you add in a neurodiverse child who needs maybe some stimulus or maybe like something to bounce their legs on or something to give them that stimulus to be able. So how can we better work with children? And I think I'm just curious your thoughts because some in my mind, and tell me if I'm wrong, my goal here when I think about a neurodiverse child is I want this child to feel like they know who they are, and I don't want them to conform to a neurotypical world, but I want them to be able to have things that can make them be a part of that world. Is that a good way to look at it? Or because, like, for example, like in a school system, I don't want my neuroatypical child to not have to be in a class with their peers, but what can we add to make this a more enjoyable
Yeah.
experience for that neuroatypical? Is that kind of the goal
Yeah.
that we hope with neuroatypical children? Or what would you say is a better phrasing of that?
I think it's right on track. I think if we lead with the idea that we want everybody in the environment, the classroom, the home, the
Hmm.
library, the park, to feel like they are comfortable enough to exist in that environment.
Okay.
Comfortable is the easiest way to boil it down, and to have the autonomy to choose to participate.
Hmm.
And if they have no interest, if they don't feel comfortable, they have other options to exist amongst their peers, to be with their family, but maybe they don't want to participate in the way that you think it looks like they're going to participate. If we can lead with the idea that there's not necessarily a neurotypical brain. If I said that earlier, let me rephrase. It's not that there's one textbook perfectly wired brain and
Hmm.
that's the model brain that we need. There are neurotypical standards and unspoken rules and social norms and things that our society function around. And there are some people with a brain wiring that can get through daily life with no need for accommodations.
Yes.
Maybe they are inconvenienced, maybe it's annoying, maybe they're bored sometimes, maybe they have sad days, maybe they experience anxiety some days, but they can get through daily life without really any need for modifications, and it's not going to affect their nervous system, their mental health, their success, their functioning, their quality of life. There are people with other kinds of brain wiring where they need significant accommodations or tools or strategies in order to be able to feel comfortable to access all of the skills that they have in their brain. And that's how I classify neurodivergent and neurotypical.
I love that. Thank you. No, and also because what I wanted to also just kind of be clear is, we talk about a neurotypical world is what the default is, right? Like meaning that is kind of what we know, whether it's
Yeah.
from sensory, whatever it is, and that because I want it to be that here's the world we're in. Are we, what are we trying to accommodate? Because then people are like, we're trying to fix it if we're trying to accommodate. I'm like, is that it? Or is it more that we're trying to make them, like you said, feel comfortable in these situations, whether it is a neurotypical child or neuroatypical child, both of them we would have to do. But respecting the fact that a neuroatypical child may need a little more assistance in being more comfortable in a situation that may not always be what a neurotypical child might be
That
comfortable in.
right. There might be some things in that environment that require a neurodivergent person to work harder to filter
Yeah.
certain sounds out, to feel comfortable in, to be able to get the right movement or stimulate, to be able to be alert and to focus. So they might need more breaks. There's so many different ways that they can quote deviate from neurotypical standards, and yet that's not a deficiency. It's not an impairment. It's not something wrong. It's just that's the way that they work. Can we be conducive to that? Can we help make that a possibility for them?
Oh, very, very. Thank you so much for answering that. Like I said, I love speaking with you, speaking to others about again, just trying to find the right understanding, terminology, things like that. It to me is an important way, and I know it's not always about getting it right or saying the right thing. But I do believe it's nice to always want to learn. So thank you for teaching me. I really appreciate that. And in terms of the book, obviously the book is something that we hope that people can read with their child and have conversations about. What would you say from a first basic standpoint? How would you explain what being neuroatypical or what is neurodiversity to a child who may not understand what that is? Like, how would you explain it to a 5-year-old or above? Yeah.
Yeah. So the sequence of the book really takes it through the sort of like mini curriculum that I typically do with kids, whether I do an assembly or I'm talking to one-on-one or a family. And I start by just talking about how brains look the same from the outside. Like if you could think of
Mhm.
a brain, if you can draw a brain, we all have a picture of what a brain looks like, and it'll all be pretty similar. But there's parts of the brains that we can't see that are different, and those are called neurons, and that's how they connect to different places in your brain and in your body. And I say it's kind of like wires, and they connect. And there's different ways and patterns that our brain connects to different parts of our brain and body that make us different. So it makes
Mhm.
us be able to learn our favorite song, or it makes some of us good at chess, and it makes some of us good at tag, and all of these things that make us different. Um, and the differences between us is really what's called neurodiversity. And I break down the word even. I say neuro means neurons. And when I'm talking to kids, I always, especially a big group of kids, I just say neuro means neurons. Can everyone say neurons? Neurons. And just
Neurons! I
have
like it.
it,
I'm like,
woo! Yay, party!
"Yeah."
And
So
then
cute.
diversity means differences. And
Yes.
then I'll have them say diversity, and then we'll put it together. So we don't need to sugarcoat the word. So I would teach a 4-year-old the word neurodiversity. Break it down if you have to. So just talking about that there's differences among all brains, and then maybe zoom in about like differences that are very concrete and relevant to that particular child in their community. So it might not be relevant to every child, but I bet there's some kids that they know at the playground or in their classroom who move their hands back and forth, who wear headphones, who maybe make sounds with their mouth that aren't words. So I would talk about those differences and how they communicate differently. I would talk about kids who like to play a certain way, and kids who prefer to play another way, and really, really just boil it down to behaviors that the child naturally sees in their environment, and reframe them as differences that usually they fall under either differences to communicate, differences in how they play, differences in how they learn, and then differences in how they experience things. So if you can point out one of each of those things that relates to your child specifically that they can think of and say, "Oh yeah, I remember seeing that other kid on the playground the other day. He didn't like to play on the swings by sitting on it. He liked to push the swing back and forth." just with no one on it. That's how he played with the swings. Then I remember that kid at circle time and how he preferred to learn by standing and fiddling with something. That's how he learns. I need quiet. So differences in play, communication, learning, and experiencing the world. If you could come up with one concrete way and one concrete example to talk to your child about that, that's going to be the best way to illustrate neurodiversity and make it like a tangible thing for them to understand.
I love that. Again, the book goes so much deeper into that with that example that we had at the beginning with the dining table and something that
Yeah.
another child may be like, okay, big deal. And they're looking at maybe their sibling or a friend and they're like, why are they reacting like that? And,
Yes.
how the words that we use as parents versus, oh, they're being difficult versus,
Mhm.
hey, they're just learning. They need a little more time and that's okay.
Mhm.
Is so much more empowering for that child who's dealing with that situation, but also that child who's observing how we as adults are communicating that, right?
Yeah.
Um, Having your experience as a OT mom who is neurodivergent, a neurodivergent child, the work that you do. I mean, you're approaching this from many different angles. What are some phrases or things that you feel are not helpful that you've heard from the work that you've done, or even if you're willing to share that have been told to you when speaking about your neurodiversity or a child's neurodiversity that you wish parents would just kind of be acknowledging of and maybe try to fix? And I would, if you
Yeah.
have any examples, that would be helpful because I know we're talking, the book is so much more about what to do, but are there
Yeah.
certain things that you're like, you know what? If I have this soapbox right now, which you do, what would I
Yeah.
want to tell people?
I think a main one, again, one of my inspirations for this book, but a conversation that's been very present recently on my Instagram posts and in the discussions is this idea or fear from parents of not wanting to label their child. So when we
Mm,
talk about diagnoses, when we talk about being neurodivergent or sensory seeking or sensory avoiding, um, a lot of times parents tend to call those labels and they say, I don't like to label my child. My child is just the word just, my child is just highly sensitive. My
mm,
child is just shy. My child just needs time to warm up. My child is
mm,
just all these other labels,
yeah.
which it's quite ironic to me to hear people avoid labels when they mean they're avoiding the diagnosis because there's a stigma attached in their mind about this.
Yeah.
And again, I have been there. We grew up with that. It's not your fault. It's not your fault that you have this internalized ableism, is what we call it. It's not your fault. There's nothing wrong about the fact that that happened because that's what we grew up with, but it is your responsibility to unpack that and try to change that and dismantle that internalized ableism. So worrying about, if I label my child, I don't want them to feel different. I don't want them to be treated differently. I pause there for a second and I say, they are different
Yeah.
and they are already being treated differently. You can't stop ignoring the autism, ignoring the ADHD, ignoring the sensory needs doesn't make it go away. It just makes it seen in a different light. So that's my biggest soapbox message to parents is that labels aren't bad. I agree that there are some words, like I try to avoid disorder because autism is not a disorder, but they're still autistic. They still have a very specific brain wiring that falls under an autistic neurotype. And I would say the second kind of more general um, misconception or something that I would love to dismantle. We had another conversation. I might have brought this up there, but it's the idea that like parents will ask, or teachers too, um, is this sensory or behavior? Is my child doing this? Is this what they're doing? Is it a behavior or is it sensory? And I always have them take a step back and I say, well, it's a behavior, period. It's a behavior. There's nothing wrong with behavior. It's just an observation of what a child is doing that you can see on the outside. And I think what you're asking here is my child's behavior being caused by a sensory need or something that they can't help, or are they doing it on purpose? That's really what the question is getting at.
Yeah.
And so I want parents to just see every single behavior that you see is a reflection of the nervous system. And it's being dictated by what that nervous system is experiencing and what it needs. And when you start from there, it opens up a different way of approaching parenting where it doesn't feel like you are faking it or just following a script. because you know that that's gold standard, but you don't believe it. When you start seeing
Yeah.
their nervous system, you're like, okay, now I'm starting to get it. And then it feels more natural to do some of these neurodiverse affirming parenting strategies.
Well, exactly like you said, I don't like labels for things that are going to be transient. Like, for example, like I consider shyness a transient thing because in certain situations, a child who is shy may be more open, right? So picky eating, I don't like labeling that because it can be transient. But
Yeah.
someone's identity is not transient. It's like saying, well, I don't want to be Indian today.
Right.
Like I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, but no, I am Indian. Let's call a spade a spade. It's
Right.
okay. And also by doing that, we can serve them better in terms of like this sort of, like you said, the resources, like what do they need? What do they need to be able to, again, be comfortable in the world that they're in? And if we don't allow that ability, we're not, in my feeling too, we're not allowing them to reach their own full potential on their own development, not comparing to anybody else, but like
Yeah.
what can we provide for that child? And going back to how you beautifully phrase that, for them to be comfortable in this world, because I believe every child deserves that 100%.
Yes. Yep.
Safety and comfort.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, with this book and the work that you're doing, I guess this could also be a final question. What do you hope the world would be like in 10 years when it comes to neurodiversity education and acceptance in your ideal 10-year outlook?
Oh my gosh. Such a big question.
Yeah.
I really hope that what we consider accommodations are just a normalized thing, that you don't have to prove that you have some golden ticket diagnosis in order to get a certain
Yeah.
accommodation. I just want people to feel empowered to ask for the accommodation, to know what works for them, to feel that they deserve to take up space in community spaces of all different kinds of diversity, but just this idea that you're not a burden to ask for an accommodation, that it's just a part of normalized society, that maybe it's not even considered an accommodation anymore. And it's
Yeah.
just the way that you are at the library, it's just the way that you shop. And that I think can help a lot of mental health related challenges that people experience, and hopefully more community and a
Yeah.
lot less hate and unkind things happening in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I you brought it home perfectly. The judgment, the fact that it needs to be fixed. I know that that goes around social a lot, and we have talked about that as well. The most recent one I saw was the smoothie that could fix your
I
autism, and I'm like,
I've seen Smoothie, I've seen
I'm
Life.
like, I have a reel that I'm gonna actually respond to with that, but I'm like, it's so, for me, obviously this is, and that's why I asked the wordage that you would say, and like, this isn't something that
Yeah,
needs fixing. I mean, we are trying to understand and
yeah.
celebrate just like we would any other form of diversity. And I love this. I'm so excited to read it with my son. I'm going to do it on a weekend because on weekdays I try to pick shorter books because of
Yeah,
like school
totally
night.
get that.
It's not that long. It's
Totally
not.
get
It's
that.
not that
Yeah.
long, everybody.
It's
But
not
it's
that
like
long, but
it's longer than like if you want a quick book on a weekday because you got to get to bed. Like it is our
and you
Saturday
wanna
night
leave
book.
time for questions. You wanna
Yes,
leave it's a
correct.
conversation starter
Yes.
for
So
sure.
I'm
It's
gonna
not just a get through the book and then tuck them in and good night.
Exactly,
I
exactly. We are
really
gonna have a debrief. We are gonna talk. We're gonna talk about
yeah,
himself. And I've mentioned this to you. We have another podcast coming, and I jumped this up before. But I look at my son, and I do see some things that I'm like, oh, he could be neurodiverse in some ways. No official diagnoses, if you will.
uh-huh. Yeah,
But I can't wait to talk to him about this book because some of the feelings that he has with certain routine changes and
yeah,
certain ways that he doesn't like things on his hands, like
yep,
all these things like we talked about in our sensory episode. I cannot
yeah,
wait to chat with him about and like let him understand, because at the end of the day, this is not only about acceptance for everyone else's kids. Like I want my kids to be kind to all children, whether they can
yes.
see a difference or whether it's not always visible. You don't have to be everyone's best friend, but you have to be kind. I mean, that is my
I
rule with
agree with
parenting. Like
I agree with that.
there's no room for raising assholes. We are going to raise children who love, and if we don't play with everyone, we are kind about it, because I get it. I'm not best friends with everybody, but how can we be kind? How can we be inclusive? How can we notice the child who may be more quote unquote shy, who may need more warming me
Yeah,
up? How can we include these people to be more kind human beings? And
yeah.
I think how amazing would the world be if all of us stepped up as parents to raise kids like that?
That would be ideal. I think that if we can teach our kids to lead with curiosity instead of
Yes.
judgment, This goes for parents. I'm talking to
Yes,
parents
I know. I
too,
was gonna
and
say, yeah.
adults. If we can approach every potential conflict, disagreement, all of those things with curiosity first, before even making a judgment, how
Yeah.
many conflicts and arguments or really uncomfortable scenarios would we avoid if we led with just saying, "That's interesting. I wonder why they think that way. I
Yes.
wonder why they do that way." And just even starting there, it just opens up so many more opportunities.
Laura, I love talking to you. I know we have another episode going live in the fall. Everybody, we
Yes.
actually recorded that one first and then we recorded this one again. So if I say like, introducing, she's
Yeah.
coming back again here before the other one.
Yes.
And that's because of this book. So a kid's
Yes.
book about neurodiversity. Tell us, Laura, where people can find this book and also where they can go to stay connected with you. And if you can't see me, I'm holding up the book that you all need to get.
Yay. Yes. So you can find the book at theotbutterfly.com/book. I put as many different international Amazon links and other links for you to purchase on in one spot. So you can go there. And then I am always on Instagram at theotbutterfly.
Perfect. I'm going to be linking the otbutterfly.com/book, her Instagram handle as well. So you can stay up to date on the book that she's written, obviously, all the work that she's doing. Laura, you are one of my favorite contacts in the social media world. I hope that one day we can meet.
Same.
I know we've talked
Same.
about that if I'm in town and whatnot, but
Yes.
really, I,
Please.
I learned so much from you. And I've mentioned this, like, there's not I learn a lot from people, but like there are certain people on social that I learn way more from. And you and there's another Andy
Andy
Speechy P.
Putt, Mrs.
Yeah, Andy
Speechy P.
Putt.
She's
Yeah.
fantastic.
I love learning about neurodiversity from both of you because I've
Thank
been
you.
very transparent. We don't learn nearly as much about neurodiversity in training as we should. And so part of my like continuing education to be a better doctor and to be
Yeah.
a better person on social media is to understand. And if I really appreciate that the work that you do because as a fellow professional, I learn so much. So, big shout out to the work that you do. Thank you.
That means a lot. Thank you so much.
And for everyone listening, I know you enjoyed this conversation. Please share this episode. So leave a comment below, hit that thumbs up sign. That is how people can learn about this episode and learn about this show as well, so that we can continue to raise amazing children who love each other, are kind to each other, and can accept the differences and look at the beauty of how we are different and how that makes us a wonderful place to live. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Mona.